The millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our weekend edition. We have lots to talk about today. In studio with us, Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice. But I think we should also focus a little bit of time and attention on what is happening in Florida. I was just thinking, Penna, 2 weeks ago, we have you and Kelly Shackelford here, and say our thoughts go out to those in certainly Corpus Christi and Houston and other places. Of course, our radio station in Corpus Christi, I think, has been off the air for quite a long period of time. I have those same kind of thoughts today for our friends in Florida, don't you?
Yeah, I one of the days during the hurricane down in Houston, Harvey, I hosted, and I was just talking about how, when your country hurts, you hurt, and it's almost like you just feel it constantly throughout the day. Especially, it was my own state and my own country that I felt it. But now this huge section of our country is under, threat, and it's hard not to think about it. We have lots of important things to cover today, but we certainly are praying for just a supernatural move of the Lord to divert Irma from doing damage to Florida.
Certainly. When we talk about home state, Jeremy Dice, of course, your family has been in Florida, and I know your parents actually were able to escape, and they left early, but it took a long time to get out of the state, didn't it?
It sure did. It took them almost 12 hours just to get to go a 7-hour drive. So that was a long time for them, but
Yes.
it was thankfully they got out. And I understand we've got volunteer attorneys down in Miami. They've pulled out as well and retreated to Orlando and some other places, but still a lot of childhood friends back down in Fort Myers. The homestead is still back down there in Fort Myers, so I'm thinking and praying for everybody back down at home, and hoping that the creek don't rise.
Yes. Well, we'll see how that plays out. And again, those of you that would like to contribute, we've made that possible in the past. And of course, we certainly do recommend groups like Samaritan's Purse. But we wanted to get into some of these issues. And Penna, when you were not with us last week, celebrating your birthday, by the way, belated happy birthday to you. We spent some time talking with Kelly Shackelford about some really dismal decisions that came out of the 9th Circuit and the 10th Circuit. Well, we got good news today. We have a very favorable ruling out of the 6th Circuit. And so, Jeremy, tell us a little bit more about what that might entail.
Yeah, no, it's actually very good news that the 6th Circuit, now they were sitting what's called en banc, which is a fancy Latin term that we lawyers like to throw around to look like we know something or two. That means the full court. So the court sitting en banc with quite a few judges, more than 15 judges sitting together to hear this thing. They came out with a decision in our favor, in favor of our client, I should say, which is the County Commission for Jackson County, Michigan. Now, Jackson County Commission has a practice like I'm guessing most county commissions do across the country here, which is they begin their meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then someone provides an invocation. It just happens that in Jackson County, it's the commissioners themselves that are actually providing that invocation. So they do it on a rotating basis. Nobody has to do it, but they'd rotate through, and as you have opportunity, they take their part. And so the question was that there was an activist there locally that said, this really offends me. I don't like this. He happens to be a self-described pagan and animist. And was upset with this whole thing, so he filed a lawsuit. The federal district court there in Michigan said this isn't a problem, it's perfectly constitutional, cited multiple cases at the Supreme Court that said that this should be fine.
Sure. But
the small panel, the 3-court panel in the 6th Circuit said, no, this is a problem. And so that's why we went to the whole panel, and all the judges there said, no, the district court was right. And so for now, Jackson County Commission is perfectly willing and able to continue with their practice, which has been part of the tradition of this country for well over 200 years. The Michigan State Legislature opens their meetings with prayers and invocations. There's no problem whatsoever with this county commission doing it as well. So what kind of makes us kind of geek out in a lawyerly sense here is that we also represent someone in the Fourth Circuit, the Rowan County Commission in North Carolina. They have a very similar practice. Well, the Fourth Circuit has a different opinion on this matter, and they have invalidated that as unconstitutional. And so that has created what we call a circuit split, and the Supreme Court of the United States really doesn't like it when their courts of appeal are split on their decisions. They've got to bring some unanimity to the whole thing, and so the likelihood that this will end up before the Supreme Court is extremely high.
Well, you answered the question I was going to ask, and that is because now you have two different ones, the Fourth Circuit and the Sixth Circuit, with different opinions. Penna, that almost forces the Supreme Court to do something because you can't have this patchwork quilt, can you, around the country?
Sort of catapults the case. But,
yeah.
Jeremy, the question I have is it wasn't that long ago that there was another case. It was the town of Greece versus Galloway. I know it wasn't your case, but it was an important case we were watching, and the decision went well for religious liberty. So, why are we having to fight this battle again?
Well, because freedom requires a constant defense, for one thing. It doesn't mean that that once you finalize a case, everybody's going to finally agree with it, and no one's going to people are going to stop being offended. That is hardly ever the case. But in this circumstance, thankfully, going back, I was I'm trying to add it up quickly in my head. I was 5 years old in 1983. So that just told everybody how old I am, I guess. But in 1983, Marsh versus Chambers was decided,
yes,
which said that invocations prior to I don't, but that's okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. That was
I was around when that was. We actually talked about that. Go ahead.
But in 1983, Marsh versus Chambers said that the legislatures, the state legislatures, were perfectly able to do this. This is part of our history. It's part of our tradition.
Right.
It's what we've done since the founding of our country. Then in 2014, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Greece versus Galloway came around and said that citizen-led invocations are perfectly fine. So local clergy can provide it, local people. It doesn't matter. This is, again, part of our heritage, and so long as it's done with some solemnness and it's respectful in its tone, there's no constitutional problems here whatsoever. We just think that the next logical extension is here that if it doesn't matter whether clergy are given it, doesn't matter the person that is actually given it. So the Supreme Court should be perfectly fine, we think, with what the Sixth Circuit has said here. The commissioners themselves can do it just as well as the rest of the citizens of whom they are as well, as they can do it. So if they weren't a commissioner, they could do it. Because they're a commissioner, they're arguing, the other side is arguing they can't do it. That is just simply incorrect. I love what Judge Sutton said. I'll have to find the quote to read it directly later on.
Okay.
But Judge Sutton, in his concurrence, said something to the effect of, "Hey, look, just because you're offended doesn't mean that you get to shut this whole thing down.
Yeah.
It is not the responsibility of the court to act as a helicopter parent, basically, to everybody who's offended by these things."
Well, again, just great material that we've posted. The first article here will take you to First Liberty. You can go to firstliberty.org, but then you have to go to cases, then to go to Jackson County, and then find your way. We have the link, so you can find that as well. And when we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit about something else, because that 3-judge panel voted 2-1 as it being unconstitutional. Then we talked about that Fourth Circuit that voted it as unconstitutional. And that brings us to a conversation we had with Kelly last week. If we get the right judges in the circuit courts and the federal courts, some of this kind of problem evaporates. And I understand there's a rumor that you're going to be putting a map up here that will actually show what are some of the judges that are up for consideration that are still waiting for their day in court, if you will, right?
That's right. You can still go to TrumpNominee.com and see the positions that are open, but very soon here we'll have a list, a clickable list of the backgrounds and biographies of individuals that are currently being nominated for the court.
Well, and again, as long as you are not a Catholic and strongly believe that, everything is fine. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, because Senator Dianne Feinstein had a problem with the Catholic faith of one of these judges. And again, just the slow walking of these judicial nominees is another issue we'll get into, but we need to take a break. Jeremy Dice with us, Penna Dexter. We'll take our break and come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Members of Congress are debating fiscal issues, but unfortunately they often are debating the wrong issues. On the table are two issues, the debt limit debate and the tax reform debate. As important as they are, they pale in comparison to a bigger issue. Justin Bogie and Chase Flowers say that America's headed straight into its most avoidable crisis ever. In fact, they compare it to the familiar story of the sinking of the Titanic. The crew of the Titanic chose to ignore warnings of icebergs. Congress can fall into the same trap instead of avoiding a crisis that is preventable. Already, the federal debt has reached $20 trillion and is growing at an unsustainable rate. According to the long-term projections of the Congressional Budget Office, the federal debt is projected to increase from $20 trillion to $92 trillion in the next 30 years. The only areas of spending that are expected to increase as a percentage of GDP are Social Security, major health care programs, and interest on the debt. These are the three areas that will be driving the national debt. What will be the impact? First, interest rates could rise sharply because creditors want more protection or because the government is attempting to sell more bonds than people are willing to buy at current rates. Second, these higher rates will mean that the cost of the federal debt will be greater. This will force the government to either tax more or borrow more. Third, this increased federal debt will restrict the government's ability to use tax and spend policies to respond to financial crisis or even an economic downturn. Of course, the younger generations in America are the ones who will bear the brunt of these dire economic trends. Unless members of Congress reduce spending and rein in entitlements, higher taxes and lower wages are what await these younger members of society in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As always, talk a little bit about religious liberty and this wonderful decision coming down from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Have some other issues to talk about in just a minute. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice. And Jeremy, you quoted from, and kind of paraphrased, was it Judge Sutton? Tell us the exact quote.
Judge Sutton is one of the judges on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. You may recognize his name because he appeared on a list of 20 judges that President Trump had put out a year or so ago now. Well, Judge Sutton writes in a concurring opinion, which means he agrees with the opinion, but just kind of wants to have just a slightly different take on the matter and wants to have his 2 cents put in there. So he writes in part of his decision, he says, quote, "Good manners might have something to say about all of this and how it is done. So too might the Golden Rule. But the United States Constitution does not tell federal judges to hover over each town hall meeting in the country like a helicopter parent, scolding, revising, okaying the content of this legislative prayer or that one," unquote.
Oh, I got to put that quote in a future commentary or something like that.
It's a very clever turn of the phrase, and I think it explains it very, very well.
Speaking of commentaries, I might just mention you get a chance today to hear Penna Dexter's commentary, and we send it out on Saturdays, so you can sign up for that. And I know so many of our listeners say, I know that voice because I hear it at 1:45 or 2:45 or whenever it happens to be. So, again, it's great to have both of these voices here today because we have a chance to hear them.
Because Jeremy's commentaries are aired daily on weekdays, and they are so fascinating, Jeremy, because you get the stories of religious liberty, and really nothing informs you better than a story. So you're able to package it into 90 seconds or whatever you're doing.
Like I've said before, right? If you
every time I brush my teeth, I think of your commentary. I don't know why.
The dentist tells you to brush your teeth for 90 seconds, so press play on my podcast, and when I say go to firstliberty.org, you're done.
There you go. All set. Well, again, you can listen to those as you go to First Liberty as well, and you can sign up to get the podcast and some other things, I believe. Isn't that true?
It's available on iTunes, but of course you could also go to firstliberty.org/briefing. and sign up for it there as well.
So again, we hear that voice every day when we have a chance. Of course, we hear Penna's voice today on the commentaries. And Penna, just before we leave First Liberty and move on to some other areas, I noticed that they filed a brief the other day. Talk about that.
Well, speaking of stories, I think these stories, these sagas of these wedding vendors who are serving couples as bakers, as florists, whatever, and who are having their livelihoods threatened because they stick to their religious convictions and do not serve same-sex weddings. We've got one of those cases, which comes out of Colorado. The Masterpiece Bake Shop is going to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's going to be heard soon. And you have a baker client who I think they're the most compelling couple, the Kleins, Aaron and Melissa Klein, who've been fighting in the state of Oregon for years, and they've really suffered. And so they have gone to, as their fellow bakers, fighting for religious liberty, to file a brief in Jack Phillips' Masterpiece Bakery case. Correct?
Yeah, we just put that on file here late last night, as a matter of fact, and put out the release this morning. You can go to firstliberty.org and read the entire release and the brief, too, if you really wanted to. But the point of the matter is to say, look, yes, this is clearly expressive activity, that this is part of who we are, and more importantly, the state, in this case, the state of Oregon, none of the states and the government itself should not be coercing us, compelling us, penalizing us for abiding by our religious conscience, the way that Jack Phillips has done, and certainly the way that Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers out in Oregon, are clients who have had to face that as well. And just to remind folks, they declined business from a client they had served before, previously. But when it came time for them to have to participate in a same-sex wedding, they said, look, my conscience will not allow me to do that. I'm really sorry, but there's 4 more bakers over here that'll do it for you. We just can't do that. That resulted in the Bureau of Labor and Industry in the state of Oregon assessing a $135,000 penalty on them. That they just went in and started collecting at least part of that before they began to have the chance to even pay that. No opportunity really to meet that in court until we went to the Oregon Court of Appeals, which is where we're still at, waiting for that decision. But we're telling the court at the Supreme Court of the United States, hey, when you are deciding the Jack Phillips matter, you're effectively helping to decide our matter as well, because what happens to Jack is going to affect us as well. So be careful.
I think what's so similar about them is because I know Jack Phillips would sell a cake to a homosexual couple, and he would even probably sell it for their wedding if he didn't have to create it and to be part of that ceremony. And that is Melissa Klein. When I heard her speak one time, she was in tears talking about how she loves the clients. She's kind of an emotional, creative, lovely mother of 5. And, she takes her time with the couple. She interviews them. She learns about them. She tells their story with the cake. And so when you know that, and I think that is probably true with a lot of these bakers that are fighting out here for their livelihoods, really, then you can understand why they just would not be able to do this if they hold a strong Christian convictions.
And I find it interesting looking at some of the other amicus briefs that were filed late last night as well. You had an association of cake bakers throughout the entire country, a whole mess of them. And they actually, if you look at the briefing, there are pictures of the cakes that they have created there and saying, look, this to us is speech. We're cake artists here. This is something that we produce and put a lot of ourselves into. And so protect this issue, the right for everybody. They didn't take a side one way or the other. They just said, hey, look, protect the right for us to be able to engage in this speech. And then there was also the Department of Justice came out with their own amicus brief on this matter as well. And it may surprise some to learn that they sided with Jack Phillips. They did not side with the previous administration that did in fact go against Jack Phillips in his case. They've come out and said basically the same thing, that people of faith should not be punished for entering in the public marketplace, and that we ought to, through the First Amendment, remain committed to protecting the rights of conscience of small business owners, including cake makers.
Well, again, something to watch. Do you know any more about when that case will be decided?
That will be heard,
I should say.
Yeah, that will be heard this upcoming term. I can't remember the exact date, and then we'll have a decision before June of next year.
Yeah.
As having tried to bake cakes for various birthdays and things, you have to be an artist. You truly do.
Yeah.
I consider myself something of an artist in that regard as well, because every time my wife's birthday comes around, I'm at Nothing bundt cakes.
Yeah.
Artistically.
Smart.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Let's get into this other issue of judicial activism, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that, as we pointed out, I think we're up to almost 140 vacancies in the federal judiciary, and we talked a couple weeks ago about how a lot of that has been slow walking because of blue slips and all sorts of various attempts to slow down the process. But in the midst of this, we also have a couple of articles. I've posted one by the Washington Examiner. Also, there's a commentary by Todd Starnes. But Penna, this is again where we see U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who seems to be very disturbed about one of these nominees, Amy Barrett, who, coming from the Notre Dame Law School, because she's a devout Catholic, seems to bother Senator Feinstein and probably a few others on that particular committee. So what have we found out?
Yeah, we can tell the story of Judge Barrett, but I think the attention grabber here is what Dianne Feinstein said. And she's the quote from the hearings, because Dianne Feinstein famously on the Judiciary Committee, when you read your speeches, she's saying this to the judge, the conclusion one draws is that the dogma lives loudly within you. She'd already been asked if she was a Catholic, if she was an Orthodox Catholic. That's the concern when you come to big issues that large numbers of people have fought for years in this country. This sort of reminds me of a couple of months ago when we were talking about Bernie Sanders asking a nominee, and this was just out of the blue, for the Office of Budget Management and Budget Deputy Director, asking him about his writings that had to do with faith. And, it just makes you think that there are some senators in the U.S. Senate that actually, in their minds, think there should be a religious test, and you only pass it by being an atheist or unreligious.
Well, and the odd thing is that the Constitution expressly forbids a religious test for office. And the founders put that in there specifically to avoid not only situations like this, but to avoid a government becoming lopsided with either secularist or religious individuals. It was saying, no, look, this is open for everybody. They are to be public servants, that they are to be serving everyone. And so we're not going to make the government off limits for everyone, but it's going to be a representation of the whole. Careful listeners will remember that we covered this on the First Liberty Briefing a couple weeks ago, as a matter of fact, when Senator Sanders actually did his thing there as well. I found this article interesting that you posted because it says in the article that this isn't the first time that this has happened.
No.
14 years ago. I mean,
we
were talking just a few months ago with Bernie Sanders, but 14 years ago, both Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer went against who is now Judge William Pryor at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Same issue, that they have a problem with him not only believing, but if believing is not going to be a problem, you certainly couldn't utter that in the public or actually abide by those beliefs. I thought it was funny, Penna, when you were mentioning there that she qualified first as saying, are you an Orthodox Catholic? Mm-hmm. In other words, you can be, a cultural Catholic, not really believe it, but have it in name only. But if you actually start believing this stuff, then we're going to have a problem with you.
Because with 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. And it just depends on whether you believe it or not. So we'll come back. We have a lot more to talk about, but I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls and continue our discussion right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about religious liberty. We'll take those calls in just a minute, but let's at least finish some of the conversation about Senator Dianne Feinstein. And I think it's important to recognize that, as we said, you go back 14 years, Penna, and you have Dick Durbin and Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer, and some of them raising questions about William Pryor. Just a few months ago in June, you have Senator Bernie Sanders raising questions about Russell Voigt. And now we have the same thing with Professor Amy Barrett. And so I think we are seeing a trend here. What are your thoughts?
Well, just a little background on Professor Barrett. She's a Notre Dame law professor, and she's a Catholic. And, duh, she's at Notre Dame. So then Dick Durbin is actually the senator who asked her the question, are you an Orthodox? Do you consider yourself an Orthodox Catholic? She said she was. If you mean, am I a faithful Catholic? Yes. That was her answer. And then you had Dianne Feinstein asking these questions and speaking about this with her. And, just using this sort of terminology that I thought was so interesting that she uses. It's almost critical of someone, just believing their beliefs. If you really believe it, if it's really part of your psyche and your life and the way you live your life, that's not acceptable. And that's kind of what it is. If you were just a Catholic in name only, a cultural Catholic or whatever, cradle Catholic, then that's okay. And, that is just not true, especially when we think about all the Catholics on the U.S. Supreme Court. I think of Catholics as thinkers. A lot of times they have studied, deeply into various issues. I just think that's a sort of a characteristic, but so it should be a good thing.
Yeah. But again, a lot of it is whether you believe it. Sonia Sotomayor, I'm not sure she believes Catholic doctrine. Maybe Alito and some of the others certainly do. So, I mean, that's part of it. But let me come back to you, Jeremy, because in some respects we don't want a religious test, but I really want a U.S. Senator ask any kind of question that he or she thinks is appropriate, because after all, this is a lifetime appointment. So is there a line that we can begin to figure out what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate in terms of questioning?
Well, is the senator allowed to ask the questions? Sure, that's no problem at all, but it certainly, I think, will reveal more about the senator asking the question than it does about whatever answer comes from the nominee herself. And I think in this case is exactly what we're seeing here, is that the facade of freedom has been rolled back from anybody who thought Dianne Feinstein was still committed to that idea. And instead, what pours out is just political rhetoric in what should be a neutral environment, trying to evaluate whether this person is qualified for this office. And clearly, Professor Barrett is more than a little bit qualified for this office. And so when Dianne Feinstein says things like, the dogma lives loudly within you, I think that's the appropriate response that you just had there. And all of us ought to just simply guffaw over the fact that the dogma lives loudly within you. And then she follows it up with another one that says, and that's of concern when you have come to big issues that large numbers of people have fought for years in this country.
Wonder what we're talking about here.
Religious liberty, maybe. I mean, there are a couple other things that I know what she's probably talking about, but I'm like, you do realize that the pilgrims came here to avoid people who said your dogma lives loudly within you. That's kind of why this country was founded, Senator Feinstein. Do you recall that part of your history here or not? I mean, look, this is, yes, they can ask whatever question they want. We can laugh at them for having asked it. The problem we had with, and I think rightly had with Senator Sanders, and we may see this yet with Senator Feinstein. Because that seems
so inappropriate. Yeah.
Well, he announced that I'm withholding my vote. I'm not going to vote for you precisely because you're religious. That's where he went too far. Yeah. And that's where he is beginning to impose a he could just simply say, I'm not voting for this candidate or this nominee. But he chose instead. He chose to instead add because he's religious. That does seem to get very close to that impermissible line from Article 6 that disallows senators from imposing a religious test for office. We will have to see what happens with Senator Feinstein, if she remains to be laughable or if she actually goes too close to Article 6's prevention of a religious test for office.
Well, she didn't try to hide, where she was going with this because, and by the way, Amy Barrett, she clerked for Antonin Scalia at one time. She's a mother of 7.
He was an Orthodox Catholic, if I remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
The dogma lived loudly within him as well.
That's a great line.
Well, I think that's what they're worried about. They don't want to see, talented women elevated to the, appeals courts, could be eventually nominated to the Supreme Court, who think this way. But she, it's just interesting because Feinstein calls her controversial. And she said, you are controversial. And she's saying this to a mother of 7, because many of us that have lived our lives as women really recognize the value of finally being able to control our reproductive systems. and then she's talking about the dogma lives loudly within you. And she said, I assume that when it comes to the big issues, as you mentioned, Jeremy, they're going to vote a certain way, and that you would be a no vote on Roe. That puts a number of us, very honestly, in layman's language, in a very difficult position. So that's really the bottom line.
11th Circuit Court, right? So, I mean, it's not like you're going to be voting on the Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade, but like you said,
someday, maybe.
Yeah, Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude from Rhodes College, and, of course, an individual that clerked with Justice Antonin Scalia. So I think we understand what's going on. Why they bother to use the religion issue instead of the issues issue, I don't know. But nevertheless, it just shows the world that we live in. Let me take a phone call before we get into some of that. Maybe you have some thoughts about the Supreme Court or these lower court decisions coming down or religious liberty. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Kentucky first. Rhonda, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi. My comment is that all we hear is that government should not interfere in religion. Right or wrong?
Government should not interfere, yes.
Yep. Okay. Then how can they're interfering in these businesses and bakers' rights to refuse services to those whom they want?
Yeah, and that's a good question. You know, we've seen signs that say we have a right to refuse service, no shoes, no service, those kinds of things. I mean, so the question, I think, Jeremy, is always what is an appropriate reason to refuse service and what is an inappropriate one? And you have these public accommodation laws that say that you have to serve everyone, even if it would impinge upon your artistic creativity, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a new world right now in which we have been for years prohibiting what we call invidious discrimination, those things that there's no rational reason to be able to decline service. Now, we should start with the premise here that says that every business discriminates to some degree. The soup shop discriminates by not selling me a steak. I can't force the guy who I should turn that around because you guys know I like brisket here. So the brisket shop, and I saw it in your eyes. The brisket shop.
This guy loves barbecue, by the way.
Oh, well, brisket I love very, very much. But hey, look, if the brisket store if I were to walk in there and for some unknown reason whatsoever demanded that they serve me a salad, they have the right to discriminate against me to say, I'm sorry, sir, we serve brisket here. That comes off, that's from the thing that eats your salad, that thing. We serve that. If you want a salad, go somewhere else. But I have no right to demand that they serve. Now, if I walk in there and they say, because you are a white man, we're not going to serve you that. Or if my friend walked in who was African-American and said, no, we don't serve your kind here, which would be incredibly wrong. The government has said, no, look, we're going to oppose that type of historical and invidious discrimination like that. What's going on now is that because we've redefined the institution of marriage itself and given an extension of those protections to a gender identity in some states and some counties and states here, that's now why the government is saying we've got a right to be able to like we do with race, prevent someone from hiding behind, and they've used those words, hiding behind their religion in order to decline service. Now, the argument that we're making in response to all that is saying that that's apples and oranges. It's not even. It's actually it's rocks and apples. They're two different things completely. We're saying, hey, look, we've got the religious liberty to be able to operate our business and not be compelled by the government to have to do things that go against our faith. So this is what was warned about several years ago in Obergefell when one of the justices, I'm blanking on which one now, said, yeah, sure, you're going to be able to believe it and have whisper about it in the recesses of your own home, but dare go into public and you'll be called a bigot.
Yeah,
you'll be driven away from culture here. And this is what we're facing right now. Where is this when those two things come into conflict? When the religious liberty rights were guaranteed by our Declaration of Independence, as well as our First Amendment, when they come into contact with these 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments that say we've got to protect against discrimination, what happens then? And that's what we're facing. That's what this court is going to have to answer.
We'll take some more questions about that, but we need to take a break. And when we come back, We'll continue our conversation, 1-800-351-1212.
I live in Texas. There's a gaping wound in my state and nation. It needs care and prayer as it heals from Harvey's devastation. Still, we can be grateful for the lessons learned and applied well from another devastating Gulf storm, Hurricane Katrina. We learned to get ready. One can always hope a hurricane will weaken or change course, but as Hurricane Harvey formed, state and federal authorities assumed the worst and made detailed pre-storm preparations. 200 buses were at the ready to transport people off the coast, where there were more than 40,000 beds set up in shelters. Dallas, 5 hours north, got its convention center and buses ready for a mass influx of evacuees from South Texas. Notably, the Texas governor activated the National Guard early on, and the Houston mayor had police and firefighters ready to deploy. Hurricane Katrina exposed the flaws in FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In its aftermath, Congress stepped in with reforms that are proving to be crucial today. FEMA must no longer wait for a governor's call, though the proactive Texas Governor Greg Abbott took the lead and worked closely with the feds to identify needs and marshal resources. At the federal level, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, the White House has demonstrated a reassuring ability to focus on a disaster when needed. FEMA was on the ground in Texas 48 hours before Harvey made landfall. The Coast Guard and Energy Department monitored oil and gas facilities, and 650 HHS workers were on hand for medical needs. Private companies stepped in. Walmart sent more than 1,000 trucks filled with supplies to Houston. Bass Pro Shops sent 80 tracker boats for rescues. The biggest story, though, is of individuals chipping in to help. The Journal's columnist Holman Jenkins wrote of millions of Americans who are not waiting around for someone to tell them what to do. Dunkirk-like, selfless neighbors and out-of-staters hopped into boats seeking Texans to rescue. Savor this unity and pray it endures during the challenges ahead. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about this issue of gay weddings and the whole idea of what is or isn't appropriate. Let's go to another phone call in Missouri. Scott, I think you have a follow-up question. What would you like to ask?
Well, it's sort of rhetorical, but as a side note, I'd like to say that the nominee that Dianne Feinstein was grilling knows plenty well how to control her reproductive rights if she has 7 kids. I have 4 kids, and I know my wife knows very well how to deal with that issue. So that's sort of a funny comment. But on the
it was a snarky remark, I thought.
Yes, yeah, good point.
Any woman that has a lot of kids understands all of that quite well. But anyway, on the issue of the wedding cakes, I keep thinking about this, and I keep thinking about a place like McDonald's, which is a publicly traded company who refuses to serve alcohol, but yet the Constitution specifically allows alcohol. It's written into the Constitution back in Prohibition. They tried to take it out, and then it specifically says, alcohol is something we can do in this country. And yet a publicly traded company, which is, it has to adhere to all these government regulations and laws, can say we're not going to serve it. So now, if a publicly traded company can say that, why can't a cake baker say I will not serve this type of cake because of my own conscience? And I doubt that McDonald's is doing it for conscience sake. although there are plenty of restaurants who do refuse alcohol for conscience sake.
Yeah, and there are several that do it for conscience sake, related to the Jewish faith, the Islamic faith. There was a famous quote by Mitt Romney a couple years ago. Remember when he was at the New York dinner that he was at, roasting or whatever that was, and his strong drink was a cup of coffee or something like that. Remember, this is okay. I mean, his Mormon faith precluded him from having alcohol, and there are several prominent Mormon businesses that decline on that regard. They could make a whole lot more money if they did. But your point is exactly right, Scott. We in this country afford people to be able to live and operate their business according to their faith. If their faith actually puts them at a loss for a profit, that's okay. It's all right. What we want is a diverse and tolerant society that would allow people to do that. We don't want one that is state-enforced monolithic state. We don't want that. We don't want a state to say, no, you got to believe this way and operate according to that. You got to wear this uniform and engage in this behavior, and you can't do that kind of thing. That's what the Founding Fathers rebelled against entirely. They said, no, it's good for us to have a freedom to have this diversity of faith out there, because it's actually going to help all of us come to this, at that time, as the Enlightenment, this Enlightenment idea of what the truth is. It's okay to have that kind of thing happen here. And so it's perfectly fine for McDonald's to sell a Big Mac without a side of champagne, every bit as much as it's okay for Aaron and Melissa Klein to say, I cannot be compelled, my conscience cannot be compelled to participate in a creative endeavor with a behavior that I disagree with fundamentally from a religious perspective.
You know, Penna, I was just thinking about this in a broader perspective. We were told so often that really all the homosexual lobby wanted was an opportunity to get married, and that was all they really wanted. And we have a society where most of us are sort of live and let live. Well, if you want to do that, fine. I don't agree with you, but that's fine. But we found that the moment that decision came down, it was no longer live and let live. It was, as a matter of fact, even before the decision came down, you had a prosecution of individuals that simply would say, I can't in good conscience take this picture, schedule you for this wedding, make this cake, make this floral arrangement. And again, most Americans are kind of live and let live, but at least the activists in the homosexual community, they don't want live and let live. No. They want you to completely comply and affirm everything that they believe.
I don't think we can plead ignorance on that score because, for instance, with the Klein case, Oregon did not even have same-sex marriage when their case started.
Good point.
And I don't think in the Jack Phillips case, Colorado didn't have it either. I mean, it was, these were more liberal states, and they had a lot of, this kind of live-in types of arrangements, domestic partnerships that were a little bit more official, but they didn't have full same-sex marriage. So we cannot say we were ignorant that if gay marriage came along, and we actually here on this show and other places, we certainly were warning of that our religious liberties would be targeted and that it would be much more difficult to fight once you had gay marriage as the law of the land. Now, I do know in the Obergefell decision, Anthony Kennedy wrote into the decision that religious liberty would be protected. As a matter of fact, I think some of the language that First Liberty had put into their brief in the case was basically, it seems like he practically used some of the words from the brief. In other words, that was fully part of the decision that religious liberty would be protected. But when you have that, you have to continue to do the work of following up and fighting for it.
Yeah, we call it the golden paragraph in that decision, in which Kennedy writes that people should not be compelled to, they should be permitted to be able to teach according to their faith, to live according to their faith. Maybe Dianne Feinstein would say to be able to live your dogma loudly within you or something. Yeah. I don't know. But that was exactly what the court had an opinion on. But you saw the dissenting justices say this is really shaky ground. Now, all 9 justices agree that we need to protect religious liberty, even within the context of a redefinition of the marital relationship here, as Obergefell held. But there were real dangers afloat. You don't forget the argument that was made in front of the court. Justice Roberts asked the Solicitor General, Donald Verrilli, at the time, hey, what happens when you've got a religious school that has a religious belief against this? And he says, well, I don't disagree with that. It's going to be an issue, he says.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're facing the issues right now.
Yeah.
Well, pretty interesting. Just before we take a break, one of the things we mentioned last Friday, Jeremy, is that you have some great resources available at First Liberty. And with all the kids back in school, I have encouraged people, and we've provided the link, and we'll do it again. If you go to firstliberty.org, on the upper right-hand corner, click on Resources, and then left-hand side, they have various packets for churches, for the military, for people in ministry, religious liberty, schools, and workplace. But especially since our kids are back in school, are there some resources that are available free of charge from First Liberty that people can get so that they know what their rights are?
Absolutely. And all the ones that you just listed are right there. One of them is the Know Your Rights Toolkit, and it applies for just not only students but teachers as well, so that you know what your rights are within the school context. Right now is the time when a lot of student clubs are forming. You've got the Frisbee Club and the AV Club and whatever all else that's out there. The Equal Access Act, which has been around since I was a little kid, you're allowed to have a meeting on campus, and they can't keep you off because you're a religious club, even though they'll welcome other clubs that are out there. We're receiving calls even now about some of these issues. So download the toolkit, put it inside your Trapper Keeper if that's what you're using these days. Pin it up on the refrigerator so that you know what they are. You don't know when your rights have been violated unless you know what your rights actually are, and then you don't know how to handle that unless you know who to call. This provides both of the answers to those in one packet.
Again, at firstliberty.org. And Penna, notice how he likes to make me feel old. You know, I remember I wrote a commentary about Marsh versus Chambers when he was 5 years old, or the Mergens case, which was equal access. And, oh, do I feel old now. But nevertheless, this is, again, an opportunity for you to get access to some of the resources. Our first two articles, first of all, on this issue of the court ruling in favor of invocation. So if you'd like to know about that. Second one, on which I called The Crusade Against Catholic Judges. And when we come back, I thought we might talk a little bit about DACA. That's been in the news this week, but there are some issues, just legal issues, if nothing else. DACA stands for the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals. One of those that I've posted, and there's a couple of articles really saying whether or not that whole action by President Obama was on shaky legal ground. You think? And then we'll get into the rise of Antifa and a few other issues in the news. So, of course, we also encourage you to pray for those in Florida and all along the East Coast that will be affected by Irma. And in the past, we've encouraged you to send your support for Hurricane Harvey and the flood victims. We need to take a break, though, and if you'd like to find some of the resources we're talking about today, it's all available at pointofview.net. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice will be back right after these messages.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link, learn about important issues, and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear view and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice with us with First Liberty, and we do encourage your phone calls. First hour, in case you are just joining us, we spent some time talking about this favorable decision that came in the Sixth Circuit Court on invocations, and that is our first article we've posted on our website, pointofview.net. Talked a little bit about if you will, the crusade against Catholic judges. We focused primarily on Senator Dianne Feinstein, but there were others as well that seemed to be asking questions about whether or not, if you really believe the Bible or believe Catholic dogma, whether or not that should be a disqualifier for you to serve in the federal judiciary. So those are some articles that we have posted on the website and have discussed. And if you'd like to address those issues, as we've also talked about whether or not to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding and a variety of other issues that surface, those certainly are topics that you can join us on, 1-800-351-1212. But the third article I posted here was one about whether or not the whole issue of DACA, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is on shaky legal ground, and whether or not President Donald Trump did the right thing. Let me take you back to 2012. President Obama at that point was frustrated that the DREAM Act did not pass, so instead he provided a sort of a functional amnesty, if you will, for those under the age of 37 who applied to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for deferred status. Now, the argument that he had made for many months prior was, this is not something that I have the authority to do, but nevertheless signed a memo, and we find ourselves where this particular action could have been declared unconstitutional. There was an attempt to really begin to move in that direction because of a number of attorney generals, led in large part by the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, to deal with this. So this forced President Trump really, in a sense, to do something, and what he's decided to do is have a 6-month waiting period and put the ball in the court of Congress. Penna, this is just, again, one of those issues that is contentious, but it, I think, it gives us a date certain of March 5th, and if the Supreme Court, first of all, the Congress doesn't do anything by March 5th, and the Supreme Court doesn't step in, then it is possible that some of those individuals could be deported. I doubt it'll ever happen, but nevertheless, it puts the onus on Congress, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, one of the things that was stated by individuals in the Justice Department and the administration was that there wasn't going to be a priority of enforcing this unless, there was actually criminal action. So it's, all the rhetoric that's out there right now of these poor dreamers, kind of relies on the specter of deportation of everyone. And so I think it was a smart move. I mean, a lot of conservatives may disagree with me, but Donald Trump he did kick the issue down the road, but it's kind of a rough time right now in Congress with a lot to do in September. So what he said was, we're just going to remove this policy. Congress has 6 months now to make a policy. This is really up to Congress. It's something Congress should be doing. And so let them do it and give them some time to do it. As a matter of fact, President Trump has some opinions about what kind of policy we should have with E-Verify and some other things. And he wants a wall. He wants more security on the border. So put that all together into some kind of a bill and see what happens with that. And that's what he's asked to be done. I don't think it's really not a bad idea if Congress goes ahead and does it.
Well, you would think so if you watch some of the various channels out there, but since we have a lawyer in the studio with us today, we have Senator Dianne Feinstein, who we just mentioned a few minutes ago, admitting, at least to NBC News' Chuck Todd, that really DACA was on shaky legal ground. Why so?
Well, because it doesn't carry the force of law. It is an advisory opinion, if I recall correctly. And I was just trying to search the web to go back and confirm all that. But this was not put through the regulatory process. This was not a statute. This did not go into effect because of the act of Congress or in the signature of the president, which we would normally do with our immigration policy on things. Instead, what happened is because the Democrats couldn't get their way, they effectively pitched a fit about it all, and they used the power of the pen in the president's office to issue a memorandum to say how we're going to handle this within the Department of Justice. We're going to defer action on childhood arrivals. So they decided to not currently enforce the current matters, but for later on to be able to, we'll deal with that, kind of kick the can down the road a little later on. We'll deal with it then. Well, that's all well and good, but that is a memorandum. And if you look at the Obama administration, you'll find instances, multiple, and probably dozens of instances of rule by memorandum. That is the literal definition of rule by fiat.
Yes.
And that is not how our country was set up. Kings and potentates rule by fiat. We in this country are the elect. We elect our officials to represent us on that, and we expect them to debate about it within our Congress. That didn't happen. And so all that the president is saying now, the Trump administration is saying now, is to say, look, the can has been kicked far enough. We're going to stop this now, but we're going to be compassionate and understand that this may take some time to fix. So utilizing the appropriate roles of the separation of powers, President Trump said, I'm the executive. I'm not going to rule by fiat. I'm not going to rule by memorandum. Congress, it's up to you. Congress, and frankly, I'm a little worried that Congress is actually going to be able to get their act together to do something on this whole thing. But Congress, you're the right person to be doing this. You've got 6 months to figure it out. I'm willing to extend it beyond that if we need to. But you're the appropriate lawmaker here. You guys figure this out, send us a bill, and we'll put it into law that way. This whole thing highlights a broader issue, and that is that our immigration policy in this country is awful. It is a jumbled mess of a lot of things, and it is bordering on the immoral that it is so bad. It is the responsibility of our Congress to fix this problem. And I think that's what the president, from what I've heard, is trying to kind of put their feet to that fire to do.
Congress doesn't like to deal with immigration politically. And, you know, they think they know what their base wants on the area of immigration, and they don't want to crawl over that line too close to any election. And so that's why I said I thought this was good, because sometimes Donald Trump steps out ahead of politics and does things. And so in this case, I think he's doing the right thing, because he's not decreeing anything. He's just saying, we're going to back off on this. We're going to throw this to Congress, and you have some time to deal with it.
Well, and it does seem to me that there were some other things that could be added. We sort of alluded to that just a minute ago. You could address this issue, which is pretty simple. I saw the other day that you can find one survey that shows that 78% of Americans do not believe that dreamers should be deported. Well, given the fact that some people don't know what DACA dreamers are, that means virtually everybody. I mean, you could get that up to 90% when you try to explain it. So, first of all, the reality is forget the hue and cry about all this. These individuals, these 800,000 individuals, are not going to be deported. We know that. That's a pretty easy action if Congress wants to take it. The concern is what else you add to it. E-Verify, or what's called the RAISE Act, which would actually change the 1965 law and actually give you kind of a point system. But it seems to me that those are some reasonable actions that could take place. And again, as we pointed out, Jeremy, I agree with you. March 5th, we might be looking around and saying, you had 6 months and you didn't do this? Oh, my goodness. This one's easy. The rest get really hard pretty quick. But we'll see. And, of course, March 5th is about the time when a lot of people are running in primaries for Congress. So if Congress cannot pass tax reform or repeal Obamacare or even deal with the DACA, maybe it is time to change out, send some pink slips to some of those members of Congress. Let's take a break. We've got some phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Members of Congress are debating fiscal issues, but unfortunately they often are debating the wrong issues. On the table are two issues, the debt limit debate and the tax reform debate. As important as they are, they pale in comparison to a bigger issue. Justin Bogie and Chase Flowers say that America's headed straight into its most avoidable crisis ever. In fact, they compare it to the familiar story of the sinking of the Titanic. The crew of the Titanic chose to ignore warnings of icebergs. Congress can fall into the same trap instead of avoiding a crisis that is preventable. Already, the federal debt has reached $20 trillion and is growing at an unsustainable rate. According to the long-term projections of the Congressional Budget Office, the federal debt is projected to increase from $20 trillion to $92 trillion in the next 30 years. The only areas of spending that are expected to increase as a percentage of GDP are Social Security, major health care programs, and interest on the debt. These are the three areas that will be driving the national debt. What will be the impact? First, interest rates could rise sharply because creditors want more protection or because the government is attempting to sell more bonds than people are willing to buy at current rates. Second, these higher rates will mean that the cost of the federal debt will be greater. This will force the government to either tax more or borrow more. Third, this increased federal debt will restrict the government's ability to use tax and spend policies to respond to financial crisis or even an economic downturn. Of course, the younger generations in America are the ones who will bear the brunt of these dire economic trends. Unless members of Congress reduce spending and rein in entitlements, higher taxes and lower wages are what await these younger members of society in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us, and let's go to Missouri, KTTK, and Herbert. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. I've got two questions or statements I'd like to ask.
Sure.
Here, Dianne Feinstein and others, they're to make our law and constitutional law. And for her to make a statement such as that to a judge or anyone, apparently she don't understand the Constitution, so maybe they need to have a litmus test on them before they can set and make her laws. And then the judges that's ruling like against Hobby Lobby and these Christian businesses, or ruling against the immigration thing, that what President Trump is doing is unconstitutional, when illegal aliens don't have constitutional rights anyhow. So, I would like to see some of these law firms like J. Sekulow and some of these others maybe get an impeachment case started against some of these judges, get them replaced, and maybe it would wake the others up to where they get their eyes open and say, well, maybe we need to start making our decisions by law and not just by what we want to happen.
Before I let Jeremy weigh in, I think right now, the order of business is to get President Trump's nominees approved, because the opportunity to change the judiciary comes from elections, sort of stems from that. And so there was a little slow start in him advancing nominees, but there are plenty of nominees out there. The Senate needs to act on them. And so that's where we could make the changes. I think that'd be a lot easier than impeachment.
Yeah, I think what you're feeling the tension of here is that we've got a lot of really well-qualified candidates that are waiting to be voted on by the United States Senate, but for political reasons, some are causing a real problem for that right now. There are 120 or so judicial appointments, judicial vacancies right now throughout the country. Look, you're looking at literally hundreds of thousands of cases without a judge to hear it right now. But they're sitting there waiting for a vote. These are well-qualified individuals. Some of them have their dogma lives loudly within them, I suppose. I'm going to just use that phrase until I wear it out. But
I think so.
These are well-qualified individuals with more education than you and I can shake a stick at. And they're more than qualified. They should be given a chance to be at least given an up or down vote on these things. But the politics is such that the senators who hold that authority to confirm these nominees are holding that process up and doing it for political reasons because they lost the election last year and they don't want to have to deal with that. But we're also facing the tension, and I think, Herbert, you're experiencing it right now, that comes from a system of lifetime tenure on these courts. It's very hard to make federal judges touchable. They are untouchable once they've gone through this confirmation process, unless they've committed a high crime or misdemeanor, in which case they can be hauled into the Congress for impeachment proceedings and conviction if necessary. But this is the tension in which our system is set up. Right now, we're caught between the lifetime tenure of those judges that we're frustrated by because the previous administration or administrations had appointed them, and they're making decisions that we believe are not in concert with the strict instructions of the Constitution, against the political dynamic right now that's going on in the United States Senate that is holding up judges that we believe would provide a good interpretation of these laws. So I think that's where you find yourself at right now. If you want to find an outlet for that, my suggestion would be that you make a phone call to your United States Senator and say, look, there's a whole mess of nominees for the federal bench that are just sitting there waiting to be voted on. I expect you, since I sent you to office, to return your blue slip on these things and make sure they go forward.
And again, that map that's going to be posted sometime there on First Liberty will help you see that, because let me just use one example. In Minnesota, it seems like right now, Penna, that's what's taking place, is that the blue slips, which was something that was a courtesy that said, look, I might in my particular state know something about this nominee that you, Mr. President, do not know. And so they turn in their blue slip saying this individual passes muster. Well, in the state of Minnesota, let me just use that as one example. We could pick on other states. They're not turning in their blue slips, and so those people are just sitting there twiddling their thumbs because they can't do anything, because they can't even go forward as a potential nominee before the United States Senate.
So what the blue slip is, and it's not even really a law. It's just a rule, a custom. A senator has the opportunity to turn in his blue slip, which says, there's nothing that I know about this judge that would disqualify him or her from being a judge. And you can turn in the blue slip. You should turn in the blue slip, apolitically in a sense. But Al Franken in Minnesota is not doing it apolitically. There's a nominee up there in Minnesota, and let's see, I don't even have her name right now, but he won't turn in the blue slip for
Judge
this.
Strauss, I believe
or
it is.
Judge Strauss, yeah. It's a male judge.
Yeah.
So Franken won't turn in his blue slip simply because he disagrees with the conservative positions of this judge, not because he's disqualified in any way. He's a well-qualified judge, and so that's a bad reason to not turn in your blue slips. What does the head of the Judiciary Committee do with that now? Well,
I think the head of the Judiciary Committee should turn to Senator Franklin and say, I believe Judge Strauss is good enough and strong enough, and doggone it, people like him.
That's perfect.
And allow him to go forward.
Quote of the day right there from Saturday Night Live. That is outstanding. And again, this is part of the problem, because, Herbert's saying, well, why can't we impeach them? And I think, again, that is permitted in the Constitution. I've said before, all you have to do is try to impeach one judge, even if you weren't able to remove him or her from office, and it would send a shockwave to the rest of them pretty quickly. So I'd be open to it, but the bottom line is it's been so long since we've impeached a federal judge that it just has come out of
and that
disuse.
really should be the way it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a hard. The framers put it as a very high bar to create a third branch of government that would be a little bit more independent than weighed and pushed by the political process. I understand all that, even though I have some misgivings here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best system we could probably come up with, except for all the other ones that are worse. The reality is that it's a very high bar to come up with a high crime and a misdemeanor, right? I mean, it's a embezzlement and it just bad things that they've done. You've got to go. It's just not I disagree with your political philosophy or your judicial philosophy. It's not enough. You've got to have something really criminal in order to be able to remove a judge from office.
And again, if you could find one of those individuals, I think it would send a signal. The other thing that Congress could do, and again, Congress doesn't, but it provides in the Constitution to limit the appellate jurisdiction. I mean, eventually the Congress could say, we don't need you to evaluate any more of these cases having to do with invocations. We've had enough of this. We've decided that will no longer be a case that you can even bring before your court. And that would make your job a whole lot easier at First Liberty, wouldn't it?
No, certainly. Yeah, no, the judges make a big deal in terms of what we can and cannot do and accomplish on things. So we've got a lot of them sitting up there. Judge Strauss is a good example of that in Minnesota. He's a well-qualified individual. I may have some disagreements with him on points here and there from a judicial philosophy standpoint, but for pity's sake, put him on the bench. Give him a chance at an up or down vote with the Senate. Allow these well-qualified men and women like Professor Barnett here that we were talking about earlier, give them a chance to have the full hearing in there. Don't put your finger on the scale by trying to intimidate individuals with these religious comments. That's foolhardy. They're clearly well qualified, smarter than 90% of the senators, frankly. They should just be going through the Senate and being put on the bench.
I think what we have to put up with in these Senate hearings is senators who it's their opportunity to get publicity for their positions and to be able to sort of state their case on issues and maybe just to speak to their electorate. In the case of Dianne Feinstein, she's been there a long time. But, I don't think that, it's just sort of fun to watch it. It becomes entertainment. And when you come up with phrases about dogma and other things like that we could probably use forever now and have a lot of fun with it. I guess that's what will come out of this.
Yeah, your dogma is living loudly inside of you. Yeah.
Well, again, Jeremy, one of the things that we have encouraged people to do is if they want to know a little bit more about some of these cases that they're following or even about this issue of the judges, as soon as you get that map up there, we're going to promote it because we are looking forward to helping people in the various states because we broadcast in 42 states. And if you think about that, individuals can say, oh, I'm in the state of Tennessee and this is a problem there, or we just mentioned Minnesota or California, wherever it might be. They'll begin to understand a little bit more of the extent of the problem. And you said 120, you start dividing that up, you realize there are just a lot of people sitting around waiting for their day in court, their opportunity to go before the United States Senate.
Yeah, and at the very least, even if you don't know who they all are, we'll have that information here, I hope, very shortly for you at trumpnominee.com or firstliberty.org. But you can still call your senator and say, what judges are pending right now? Look them up yourself. Google is your friend on this issue. Look them up and then call the senator back and say, yeah, give them a vote.
Well, again, if you'd like to know a little bit more, it's available at the website pointofview.net. If you'd like to join our conversation, we've got a half an hour left, 1-800-351-1212. I'm going to step out for an event. Penna will be sitting here, and we look forward to your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question. Where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. Kerby Anderson had to step out, and Jeremy Dyes and I are going to try not to do too much damage here in the final couple of segments of Point of View. But Jeremy, I just want to get some agreement with you, because I, for one, my dogma lives loudly within me, and I'm not going to be silent about it. And I don't think we have been for the 45 years that we've been broadcasting here on Point of View.
No, I think you're exactly right. Yes. And look, the First Amendment was put in place so that people's dogma could be loudly lived within them. I think we're seeing a trend here, right? We've talked about the Jack Phillips case and Aaron and Melissa Klein, our clients there, and how the liberals are very intent on wanting to silence that, what they term dogma or basic religious belief in people. Hey, look, it's okay in our society to have a loud dogma living inside it. In fact, it's okay for Senator Feinstein to have whatever the opposite of the dogma that she sees in Professor Barrett that she doesn't like. She can live that out as well. I'm perfectly fine with her to be wrong. It's perfectly okay for people to have a variety of opinions on things. That's what the First Amendment wanted to have happen. The problem that we get into is when the government starts saying, no, you can't believe that. You've got to believe this. I think here of a case that we're working on right now in front of the Ninth Circuit right now, out in California. It's a small Jewish synagogue out there who has a what some would consider very bizarre and some sort of weird practice. During their high holy days, they call it kaporos, and involves the use of a chicken. They wave it around their head 3 times as they say a prayer of atonement, and then they slaughter the chicken in a kosher fashion. That may just be discounted as kind of odd, but it's a very meaningful belief to them. It's something that's very visceral for them as a part of their religious practice. Are we to just simply say, because you use the chicken and I don't believe you should use chickens, you can't do that anymore? No, I don't think that's right. Nor
Where does
is it
that
fair.
case stand?
We won at both the state level and the federal court, but we're now the animal rights groups that had taken our client to court. They've appealed that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as well as the state system as well. So we're continuing on the defense of that synagogue. But we don't banish from public view religious beliefs just because we think they're weird or different or something other than what I believe or what the government thinks is right. We formed an entire country around the idea that we could believe as is required under the conscience that we possess. That's why this country exists. That's why the First Amendment exists. In fact, it's why the Constitution could even be ratified, because we had that protection restrained within that First Amendment before it could even be confirmed by the states. So, again, we want a very diverse society, a diverse belief of society that allows you to pursue your opinions, to be wrong in them, and have the freedom to be able to speak out against the ones that we think are wrong without having the punishment by the government.
Ladies and gentlemen, give us a call if you would like to weigh in on this discussion. The number is 800-351-1212. Jeremy Dyes from First Liberty Institute is with me in studio. And Jeremy, I think today there's a move by the left. It's a concerted effort by the left, and you see it at play in these hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where anyone who is a somewhat religious person is questioned. That is going to affect their opinions, how they rule from the bench, and they have to make statements as these judges that are now this week have been before the committee. Amy Barrett, for instance, has had to assure them that she is not going to allow her Catholic faith to override her defense of the laws of the land and the Constitution. She has to be very clear in her statements like that. And so I think what we're seeing is an attempt by the left to disqualify religious people from serving in public office. And when we talk about the businesses like the bakeries, to disqualify people who not only have a faith, but actually try to live that faith from being able to operate a business. So in so many sectors of our society now, we're seeing this attempt to disqualify religious people from living a normal life and having an influence in the culture. And, in some areas, they're actually being successful.
Well, it's true. And what you have to understand is that the reigning ideology on the left is to say that religious liberty is a code word, a ruse for discrimination. And I'm quoting, I'm trying to remember who that was that said that exact thing, but I know it came from a reigning thought leader on the other side of these things. that they believe that we're utilizing religious liberty as a smokescreen, kind of a way to hide behind something that is legitimate in order to do something that is illegitimate. Well, that is precisely the opposite of what is actually occurring. What we are attempting to actually do is utilize the freedoms that were secured by our First Amendment and recognized as inalienable in our Declaration of Independence. That is what is actually out there, the freedom to be wrong in our religious beliefs or to be right within our religious beliefs as well. But to do what one is conscience-bound to do before the divine, that's the freedom that is protected within the First Amendment. Whether that's Coach Joe Kennedy, who the court out in the Ninth Circuit has said that just because the players and the coaches and the fans can see him, his religious beliefs or his religious exercise is inappropriate and unconstitutional. That's not what the First Amendment says here. It welcomes faith within the public square, including within one's place of employment, and especially after, like Coach Kennedy, when his job was already done. It welcomes people to be able to come into that sphere without being punished or driven out of it. Like my client up in Maine, who was a special education technician who tried to tell her friend, who she goes to church with, by the way, in a private conversation at work, just letting them know that she was praying for her. And for that, she received a memorandum saying that you can't say that kind of thing within the school grounds. Well, of course you can say that kind of thing. We don't need to be allergic to religion in public on these things. The same should be said to Senator Feinstein. You don't need to be allergic to this judge because she happens to have this religious beliefs, and all of a sudden you start hyperventilating because, oh my goodness, she happens to be one of those people who actually believes this kind of stuff. There was a day, and we should get back to it, when those who possessed a religious belief, a moral compass, were the ones who were lauded and applauded for having them.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the Coach Kennedy case and I think about public education today, anytime you have a male in public education who's going to be a teacher, I'm always happy to see that, because I think our young men need good examples of men. And so this man, who was a Marine, and then comes back and coaches football, and then, prays on his own. People try to follow him and pray, and that begins to get him in trouble.
And I think about that.
Trouble.
I mean, you mentioned he's a Marine, and you're right. He was a Marine for 20 years, Coach Joe Kennedy was. Fought for the principle that you ought to be free to be able to pursue the rights that God has given to you, as our Declaration of Independence put it, that you should be able to pursue that happiness. And he gets out of the Marine Corps, and after a while, all of a sudden his employer decides, no, that thing you fought for, we get to control that. And then it has a federal judge say, yeah, they hired your speech, and so they can control it. Well, that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for a court to put someone out of view and to put someone's rights out of reach when they're engaging in religious beliefs, or religious exercise rather, when the public can see them. That's what the public square is there for. In other countries, it's a different story, but in our country, we were designed to be able to approach that public square, have your faith contribute to the diverse environment which it is found there, and that be perfectly okay.
So, Jeremy, one of the issues that we were discussing, and we are coming up on a break, so maybe I'll just kind of lay it out. And ladies and gentlemen, you can join our conversation, 800-351-1212. We will try to take all of your calls before the end of the program. But one of the areas where the Christian, say the businessman, is attacked is on the issue of same-sex marriage, the rights of the LGBTQ person. And so I guess I'd like to know whether you think this is an agenda of the LGBTQ to get more rights, to get recognized, to be elevated because they feel that for so many years they've had to be, quote unquote, in the closet, or are they, in a sense, a tool of the left to wipe out religion, to wipe out religious speech, to cleanse the public square of Christians and the Christian influence? And so, ladies and gentlemen, you can weigh in on that too. We've got a few calls to take, but I promise I will try to take them all. Again, the number is 800-351-1212. But I also am going to ask Jeremy Dies to comment on that in the next segment. But I just think it's something to think about because, our compassion kicks in sometimes for people who, claim that they've been persecuted. And yet, I think that the left uses that compassion. I mean, we talked about this DACA Dreamers issue earlier in the program. It's the same thing. They attempt to use sort of a social justice compassion, misguided though in a sense, to force us to violate our Constitution, to break our laws, and to violate the rights of people who are just living their lives according to their faith. So that's just going to be our topic in the final session. Stay with us. We've got quite a bit more after this.
I live in Texas. There's a gaping wound in my state and nation. It needs care and prayer as it heals from Harvey's devastation. Still, we can be grateful for the lessons learned and applied well from another devastating Gulf storm, Hurricane Katrina. We learned to get ready. One can always hope a hurricane will weaken or change course, but as Hurricane Harvey formed, state and federal authorities assumed the worst and made detailed pre-storm preparations. 200 buses were at the ready to transport people off the coast, where there were more than 40,000 beds set up in shelters. Dallas, 5 hours north, got its convention center and buses ready for a mass influx of evacuees from South Texas. Notably, the Texas governor activated the National Guard early on, and the Houston mayor had police and firefighters ready to deploy. Hurricane Katrina exposed the flaws in FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In its aftermath, Congress stepped in with reforms that are proving to be crucial today. FEMA must no longer wait for a governor's call, though the proactive Texas Governor Greg Abbott took the lead and worked closely with the feds to identify needs and marshal resources. At the federal level, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, the White House has demonstrated a reassuring ability to focus on a disaster when needed. FEMA was on the ground in Texas 48 hours before Harvey made landfall. The Coast Guard and Energy Department monitored oil and gas facilities, and 650 HHS workers were on hand for medical needs. Private companies stepped in. Walmart sent more than 1,000 trucks filled with supplies to Houston. Bass Pro Shops sent 80 tracker boats for rescues. The biggest story, though, is of individuals chipping in to help. The Journal's columnist Holman Jenkins wrote of millions of Americans who are not waiting around for someone to tell them what to do. Dunkirk-like, selfless neighbors and out-of-staters hopped into boats seeking Texans to rescue. Savor this unity and pray it endures during the challenges ahead.
For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Final segment of Point of View, Weekend Edition here. Jeremy Dyes and Penna Dexter are here taking your calls. And Jeremy, I sort of posed a question before the break. And, which is it? Is it a little bit of both? Is the LGBTQ movement that big and powerful that, it's just time now that they're stepping out and trying to get their rights? Or is this a tool of the left?
It's probably a little mixture of a lot of things. Look, the issue of human sexuality is hot right now. It's a developing and a rapidly developing issue, and so it's naturally running into long-held not only traditions but activities and exercises and rights. And so we're seeing a whole new smattering of these little fires popping up around the country because of that. That's to be understood. So over a period of time, I think that will probably resolve itself. And the age-old problem of the atheist and the secularist that may actually be fanning those flames. I don't know precisely. They will continue to be there and will continue to try to drive religion from public view and try to whitewash over any of its displays. That's why we continue to defend war memorials. I was telling you off air that I was in San Diego this past weekend, stopped by the Mount Soledad Cross out there that we were able to defend multiple years ago. It's still standing, but we represent the Bladensburg Memorial on the complete opposite side of the country in Washington, D.C. It's still under attack. It's still under attack and may well be headed for the Supreme Court. We'll have to see. Those kinds of things still happen from time to time. We still have students that I talked to this week down in Florida that are facing some problems with being able to exercise their faith on campus. We're going to be there to defend that as well. We've got men and women in the armed forces. Think of Sergeant Rodriguez, who was literally carried out of the room by members of the Air Force because he dared to utter God in a part of his speech on campus of an Air Force base out there. And there are employees and issues that are going on in the public square that we continue to face that have nothing to do with those other issues of human sexuality. We're going to bump into those problems, and we'll face them as we can. But the promise of religious liberty should still remain. And that's the fight that we're fighting right now, is to whether or not the reigning dogma, whether that's expressed through human sexuality or within the school context of a child trying to read his Bible during free reading time, that issue of religious liberty is what's at stake here on both of those situations. We're committed to making sure that all Americans retain their religious liberty.
It seems to be so much under attack today, and I've heard Kelly say, this has been years ago that he said this, but he said that the left sees religious people as the strongest people to stand up against their agenda. There's no one with the conviction, the power that can do it like the religious person and the religious movement, the religious institutions. They are the ones with the strength, and so they're the threat.
Well, and Kelly has also said that to the statists, the chief competitor is religion. And for those who want the answer for everything to be the state itself, they have to get rid of that competitor, because the competitor, the religious person, those who adhere to a set of moral beliefs and religious convictions, they will always be the one that will hold accountable government and restrain government's growth. And so that's why so often religious individuals and conservative political philosophy kind of go hand in hand, is because there's that natural agreement that government needs to be limited and small in its focus, whereas atheism and secularism and liberalism tend to go hand in hand because they say the state should and could control everything here. So that's where I think the fight continues to draw out, are the statists going to be the ones that are going to carry the day, or are those who believe in a more centralized and smaller form of government going to be the ones that actually carry the day?
Let's take a call. We've got Jackie listening in from South Carolina. Jackie, thank you for calling. What's your comment?
Oh, thank you. This is one of my touchy subjects. I listen to you every day on my way home from work. I think we live in a time that people need to go back in our schools, and we don't do this in South Carolina, and teach history. Find out how we got to be America. God didn't drop us out of the sky. Our forefathers founded this land on God's word, and in that word is a plan how to rule your home, your business, everything. And with that being said, if you're not happy with the Constitution that our forefathers died for, you need to get you a boat and go to Russia, go some other these countries, and leave us alone. Because God is God, and he'll always be God, and I'm so sick and tired of people trying to push God out of everything. And you know, I'm a Christian, and it just gets my dander up. But we need to stand up for Jesus. He died for us, and these people that don't want this, they need to get out of the country, quit coming in this country, go find you an island out in the Bahamas. There's 700 out there that ain't been developed, and get you one and worship whatever you want to worship, and leave us alone.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate your call, and, you know, in one sense, you know, I understand her thoughts and feelings. I think in the American system, Christianity certainly was the most influential religion, and it stands on its own against any other religions that are also allowed to be practiced here. I think that's what First Liberty Institute defends, and So, I don't say to someone, well, if you don't believe the way I do, leave. But I do say, I allow you to believe the way you believe. You need to allow me and mine to believe the way I believe and practice and live that way.
Yeah, and if we look at history has always said that those who disagree with the state when it comes to matters of conscience and religion, they're the ones that always have to be forced out and leave, right? It's never the left or the seculars that is pushed out. You think of the Pilgrims. The culture around them became too secular. First, they couldn't practice their faith openly in England in the way that they preferred to do. So they left to go to the Netherlands, and that wasn't good because of some negative influence in the culture there. So they came here to the United States and formed a new colony here. That's always been the case, that the religious have been looking for a place. And for over 200 some odd years now, America has been that beacon, that city on a hill that was so talked about by Roger Williams, that allowed people from around the country to come here when the state pushed you out because your faith was at question. They would come here and they would live here and they would assimilate to this culture and be able to practice their faith, whatever that faith background might have been, without fear of the government punishing them for doing so. But now we face a time when the left is saying, you can't do that anymore. And where else do we go? I mean, if it fails
there's nowhere else to go.
If we lose religious liberty in this country, where do you go from here? To one of those 700 islands? I don't think it can contain them.
Let me just let Hugh from Michigan make a very quick comment since I promised. Hugh, you've got about 30 seconds.
Okay. First Amendment, seems to me the Supreme Court ruled that even if we don't like the KKK or the Nazis, they could still march in Chicago. Yep. And my first teacher was a Marine from World War II. Didn't happen until I was in 6th grade. Have a first man teacher. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, I made that comment earlier that I love seeing men in public education. Yes, we can march. We have to restrain the violence and the defacing of public property. Government is responsible to do that. But the right for peaceful protest is definitely part of our system, isn't
Absolutely, and that's what we'd like to see more of. If you have a disagreement, as I'm reminded, one court said that the solution to speech with which you disagree is not to censor the speaker or to squelch him. It is to meet it with more and better speech. And that's the beauty and the idea behind the First Amendment. You may even dislike my religious beliefs, but the solution is not to censor those beliefs. It's to meet it with more and better speech to try to defeat it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening today. Jeremy, thank you for being here. It's always fun to have you in on Fridays.
Thanks for having me.
And listen for Jeremy Dye's commentaries every week at Point of View, and we air them a couple of times during the program. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend. Lord bless you.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.